They said a widow with soft hands and a broken heart had no business going near a horse that had already put 2 grown men in the hospital. They said the animal was cursed, unrideable, beyond saving. They said she should sell the land, take the insurance money, and move somewhere quiet. She didn't. And what happened next on that ranch in the hill country of Texas changed everything anyone thought they knew about grief, about wildness, and about what it really means to break something open versus breaking it down. Now, before we get into this story, and I promise you this one goes places you will not see coming, I want to ask you something. Have you ever looked at something wild and dangerous and felt like it understood you better than people did? Because that's exactly what this widow felt. The first morning she walked up to that fence and looked into the eyes of a horse nobody else would go near. If you've ever felt like the broken thing and the wild thing somehow belong together, drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. And if this kind of story is what you come here for, hit that like button and subscribe. We put out stories like this every single week, and you do not want to miss what's coming. All right, let's go back to Morrow County, Texas. 3 weeks after the funeral, the land had been in Hadley Voss's family for 4 generations, which meant the grief she carried when she buried her husband Clem wasn't just personal, it was geological. It ran through the soil of the place. It lived in the fence posts her grandfather had hammered in by hand, in the water trough her father had welded crooked and never bothered to fix, in the particular creak of the barn door that her husband Amos had always said he'd oil and never did. Amos had been dead for 22 days when the horse arrived. He hadn't been sick long. That was the thing nobody told you about fast deaths. They didn't leave room for preparation. One morning, Amos was drinking coffee at the kitchen table, complaining that the weather station was broken again. And 11 weeks later, Hadley was standing at a graveside in the October wind, trying to remember if she'd turned off the stove before she left the house. She was 43 years old. She had no children. She had the ranch, which was 312 acres of mixed pasture and cedar breaks, a small herd of Angus cattle managed by a part-time hand named Bodie, and a barn that smelled like hay and iron and the specific combination of saddle oil and dust that she associated so completely with her husband that she hadn't been able to go inside it since the funeral. The horse came because of a phone call. Her neighbor, an older rancher named Kessler, who ran a spread about 8 miles east, had a stallion he'd taken on as a favor to a friend. The friend had bought the animal at an auction in Amarillo, convinced he was getting a diamond in the rough. What he got instead was a 17-hand black thoroughbred quarter-horse cross with a disposition like a thunderstorm and a history nobody had been honest about. The horse's registered name was Blackthorn Sovereign. Everyone who'd worked with him just called him Sovereign. He had sent one trainer to the ER with a fractured collarbone. A second man had gotten away with bruised ribs and a cracked helmet. Kessler's own head wrangler, a veteran horseman with 30 years of experience, had taken one look at Sovereign in the round pen, watched how the animal moved, and told Kessler plainly, "Some horses can be reached. This one doesn't want to be found." Kessler called Hadley because he knew Amos had kept horses, and because he was a practical man who needed the problem off his property before someone got seriously hurt or a lawyer got involved. He wasn't calling to offer her the horse. He was calling to ask if she knew anybody who might want to try. Hadley said she'd come look. She didn't know why she said it. Later, when people asked her, and they would ask her many times in many ways with varying degrees of skepticism and admiration, she never had a clean answer. The closest she could get was this. For 22 days, she had been moving through her life like she was underwater. Everything muffled, everything at a distance. The casseroles people brought sat untouched in her refrigerator. The sympathy cards accumulated on the kitchen counter in a stack she couldn't bring herself to open or throw away. She slept in the middle of the bed and woke up every morning reaching to the left side out of pure muscle memory. And the half second before her hand found cold sheets was the worst half second of every day. She needed something that required her full attention. something that couldn't be managed from underwater. Kessler met her at the gate and walked her to the round pen without much preamble. He was not a man who used 5 words when 2 would do, and he didn't try to prepare her or soften what she was about to see. Sovereign was standing at the far side of the pen. Even from a distance, Hadley could see it, the particular quality of tension in the animal, the way he held his head, the way his eyes moved. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't pacing. He was utterly, electrically still in the way that only truly dangerous things can be still. Like the stillness wasn't rest, it was decision. Like at any moment, he might simply choose to go through the fence rather than stay inside it. And the fence would not have much to say about the matter. She stood at the rail and looked at him for a long time. He looked back. Something moved in her chest. Not warmth exactly, not hope. Something older than either of those things. Something that lived below language, below thought, a recognition so deep it almost felt like memory. "I know what you are," she thought. "You're not mean. You're just in so much pain you can't let anyone close enough to find out." She turned to Kessler. "What would you want for him?" she asked. Kessler squinted. "I'd want him gone, and my liability insurance intact." "What would that cost?" He named a number. It was low, insultingly low for a horse of that breeding and physical quality, because the horse's reputation had preceded him, and Kessler knew it. Hadley looked back at Sovereign. "I'll take him," she said. "I'll need a trailer by Friday." Getting Sovereign off Kessler's property and onto the trailer required 4 men, 2 lead ropes, a good deal of patience, and one moment where everyone involved thought the whole thing was going to end badly. The Stallion went into the trailer the way a storm goes through a valley. Not because you invited it, but because it decided to, and you stepped out of the way in time. Body, her ranch hand, met the trailer at the gate. He was a quiet man in his late 50s, weathered in the way of people who had spent their entire lives outdoors, with a face like old fence leather and hands that had seen every kind of animal work. He had been with the Voss Ranch for 11 years. He had not said much since Amos died, but what he'd said had been useful, and Hadley appreciated that. He watched the trailer back in. He watched Sovereign unload, the horse exploding off the ramp like something compressed and suddenly released, spinning in a full circle before standing rigid in the open air, nostrils wide, reading every smell the Texas wind offered. Body pushed his hat back on his head. "Mrs. Voss," he said carefully, "I want to ask you a question without it coming out wrong. Ask it. What exactly is your plan here?" "I don't have one yet." He was quiet for a moment. "That's what I was afraid of." The neighbors heard about it within 48 hours, because this was Morrow County, and information traveled the way water travels, which is to say it found every crack and low point and got there eventually regardless of what you wanted. By the end of the week, Hadley had received 3 phone calls expressing concern. One visit from a woman at her church named Dovey, who brought pound cake and stayed for an hour trying to talk her out of it, and a voicemail from her cousin Reese in San Antonio that started with Hadley, "I say this with love," and got considerably less diplomatic from there. She let the calls go to voicemail. She ate some of the pound cake because Dovey was a genuinely excellent baker, and there was no reason to punish the cake for the conversation that came with it. Every morning, she walked down to the round pen at first light. She didn't bring a halter. She didn't bring a rope. She brought a cup of coffee, and she stood at the rail, and she watched Sovereign move, and she let him watch her back. The first 3 mornings he kept to the far side. The 4th morning he turned to face her but didn't approach. The 5th morning he took 3 steps toward the center of the pen and stopped. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there drinking her coffee in the early light, and she let the silence be what it was, which was not empty but full. Full of the sound of cedar and cattle and the wind coming off the hill, full of grief and the particular kind of loneliness that doesn't go away when there are people around but only gets more visible. She understood. On some level, she wouldn't have been able to explain to Dovey or Reese or anyone else who was watching with concern that she wasn't trying to train him. She was trying to show him something. On the 7th morning, a woman named Thora pulled up in a dusty pickup. Thora ran the local feed store in town and had been one of Amos's oldest friends. They'd grown up on neighboring properties, had gone to the same school, had argued cheerfully about cattle breeds for 40 years. She was 61, built like someone who had never once considered the option of sitting down, and she had opinions about everything. She leaned against the fence next to Hadley and looked at Sovereign for a long moment. "He's beautiful," she said finally. "Yes, he's also going to kill you. People keep saying that." Thora looked at her sideways. "You're not sleeping. I can see it in your face." "I'm sleeping some." "Hadley." Her voice dropped to something quieter, something without the usual edge. "What are you doing out here every morning? What is this actually about?" Hadley wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The morning light was coming sideways through the cedars, long and golden and cold at the edges. Sovereign had drifted to the center of the pen and was standing with his head up, watching them. "When Amos got sick," she said slowly, "there was a point where the doctors told us what was coming, what the end would look like. And I remember thinking, I have to be so careful, I have to be so controlled. I cannot fall apart, because if I fall apart, who takes care of him?" Thora was quiet. "And then he was gone, and there was no one to take care of, and there was no reason to hold it together anymore. But I still couldn't." She shook her head. "I still couldn't fall apart. I just went still, like a clock that stopped. Everything inside me just went quiet." She looked at Sovereign. "He's not quiet," she said. "Whatever he went through, and I think he went through something real, it didn't make him go still. It made him go loud. And I keep thinking," she paused, "I keep thinking that somewhere in between where he is and where I am, there's the thing that's actually true." Thora looked at the horse for a long time. Then she looked at Hadley. "All right," she said at last. "I won't tell you to sell him. Thank you. But I'm coming back Friday, and you're going to let me watch." Hadley almost smiled. "You can come back Friday." Thora pushed off the fence and walked back to her truck. Halfway there, she stopped and turned around. "Amos would have thought this was the most Hadley thing you've ever done," she said, "in case that helps." It did. Hadley didn't say so, but it did. The first time Hadley went into the pen with Sovereign, she didn't tell anyone. She waited until Bodhi had driven to town for supplies, until the morning was early enough that the highway half a mile off was still silent. She put down her coffee cup on the fence post, unlatched the gate, and walked in. She had spent 2 weeks watching how Sovereign moved. The tells in his ears, the way his hindquarters shifted when he was calculating distance, the particular lowering of his head that meant he was processing something rather than preparing to explode. She'd done more reading in those 2 weeks than she'd done in the previous 3 years, going through every book on horse behavior and natural horsemanship she could find or order, cross-referencing with videos online at midnight with a blanket over her shoulders, because the nights in November were getting serious. She was not reckless. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. This was not a death wish dressed up as purpose. She had thought about this carefully. She had prepared. She walked in, and she stood. Sovereign went to the far rail immediately, spinning to face her, every muscle in his body cocked and ready, his breath coming fast and visible in the cold air. He was magnificent in the way of things that have not been diminished, the things that have been hurt but have refused to become small. She didn't face him directly. She turned her shoulders slightly, dropped her eyes to the ground, and made herself soft. Not submissive, soft. There was a difference. Submission was a negotiation. Softness was an offer. She stood. He snorted, pawed once, moved along the rail. She stood. 5 minutes, 10. Her feet went cold in her boots, but she didn't shift her weight. And then, so gradually she wasn't sure she was seeing it at first, the quality of his stillness changed. The rigidity began to ease, just fractionally, like a fist uncurling one finger at a time. His breathing slowed. His ears, which had been pinned back and then rigidly forward, settled to a more neutral angle. He took 1 step toward her. She breathed out slowly and kept her eyes low. He took another step. He stopped 6 feet away, and they stayed like that for what felt like a long time, long enough for the cold to really settle into Hadley's bones, long enough for the light to shift, long enough for something to happen between them that she would never be able to fully describe to anyone, but that she would remember for the rest of her life as one of the most significant moments she had ever lived. She was not thinking about Amos. That was the thing. For the first time in 3 months, she was not thinking about Amos. Not actively, not with the desperate conscious effort of someone trying not to think about something. She was simply present, entirely inside the moment. Her full attention given to the animal 6 feet away, to the language his body was speaking, to the careful and tentative thing they were building out of nothing but stillness and breath and time. He dropped his nose. He took the last step. He put his muzzle very lightly against her shoulder and breathed. She didn't tell Bodhi what had happened. She told Thora because Thora came on Friday as promised, and because Thora had a way of receiving information without immediately converting it into concern or unsolicited advice that Hadley genuinely valued. Thora listened to the whole account without interrupting. "What did it feel like?" she asked. Hadley thought about it for a moment. "Like the first full breath I've taken since October," she said. Thora nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Okay, then you keep going." The other person Hadley told was a woman named Faris, who had been recommended by Thora as someone who knew horses in the specific and serious way of a person who has studied them, rather than simply worked around them. Faris drove out the following Tuesday in a truck older than her experience, which was saying something because her experience was considerable. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, with close-cropped grey hair and the kind of direct blue eyes that made you feel like she was reading a document you couldn't see. She watched Sovereign for 20 minutes before she said anything. "He wasn't always like this," she said, not as a question. "I know. I've been trying to find out what happened to him. You probably won't get a complete picture. These animals don't file reports." Faris tilted her head. "But I can tell you what I see. I see a horse that was forced. Someone tried to speed break him, probably because of his bloodlines, because there was money involved, and impatience was more valuable to them than the horse's well-being. They pushed past resistance instead of working through it. That kind of handling doesn't just make a horse difficult. It teaches the horse that closeness means pain, that when something comes near, something bad follows." Hadley was quiet. "The men who got hurt," Faris continued, "weren't mean, probably, but they approached him like a problem to be solved rather than a creature with a history. He wasn't reacting to them. He was reacting to everything they reminded him of. How do you reach a horse like that?" Faris looked at her steadily. "You already know the answer to that. You've been doing it. Time, consistency, presence. Yes, and one more thing." She paused. "You have to mean it. You can't perform safety. You can't perform patience. He'll know. These animals always know." She looked at Hadley with those direct blue eyes. "You've been through something," she said. It wasn't a question. "My husband died in September." Faris nodded. She didn't say she was sorry, which Hadley appreciated. She simply received the information and let it stand. "That might be why he let you in," she said. "Not because you're weaker, because grief does something to the edges of a person, makes you less defended, less agenda. You walked in there without anything to prove, and he felt that." Hadley thought about that for a long time after Faris left. She stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the pen, where Sovereign moved in the long afternoon light, like something written in a language she was just beginning to learn. Less defended, she thought, less agenda. She had spent 43 years being capable, being composed, being the person who handled things. Maybe that was its own kind of armor. Maybe the loss had not only taken something from her, maybe, and this thought arrived carefully, the way first light arrives not all at once, maybe it had also taken some weight she hadn't known she was carrying. December came, and the work deepened. Every morning Hadley was in the pen before the light was fully up. She moved through the basics of groundwork the way Faris had shown her, learning to read the half-second before a reaction, to to move her energy up when she needed movement and down when she needed stillness, to ask for things in a language built of body and breath and space rather than force. Sovereign tested her constantly, not maliciously. She had stopped seeing it as malice early on, but consistently. He would offer connection and then withdraw it, come close and then spin away, yield to pressure and then challenge it again the following morning, like the whole thing had been reset overnight. Faris had told her this was normal, that it would feel like going backward more often than going forward, and that the going backward was as important as the going forward because it was where trust was actually built, in the repetition of you pushed away and I didn't punish you and I'm still here. Body watched from outside the pen on the mornings when he wasn't occupied with cattle work. He was not the kind of man to revise his opinions loudly or quickly, but Hadley noticed that the things he said were changing. Early on, his comments had been practical and cautious. Be careful of his hindquarters, watch his left eye, don't stand too close to the rail when he's moving fast. By December, his comments had shifted to something more observational, more interested. He tracked you when you walked to the gate this morning. He did that before with the feed bucket, not with a person, and once, quietly, almost to himself. He's listening to her. The person who made things complicated was a man named Cutler. Cutler had arrived in Morrow County 6 months before Amos got sick, which meant Hadley had known him for just over a year and had spent most of that time being mildly irritated by him. He ran a boarding and training operation about 20 miles west, had a reputation that was legitimately good with certain kinds of horses, and had the combination of competence and self-certainty that Hadley found consistently exhausting in people. He showed up one afternoon in early December because he had heard, because this was Morrow County, that she had Sovereign, and because Sovereign was exactly the kind of horse that would interest someone in his line of work. He got out of his truck and looked at the pen and looked at Sovereign and said, "I heard he was big." "He is," Hadley agreed. "I heard he was the one that put Daggett in the hospital." Daggett was the collarbone. The second man was someone else. Cutler watched Sovereign move for a while. He had a professional eye, she'd give him that. He was reading the horse correctly, taking in the quality of movement, the breeding evident in the bone structure, the potential underneath the history. "What are you planning to do with him?" he asked. "Work with him." Work toward what? She considered the question. It was fair, and she'd asked it of herself, and she still didn't have a complete answer. "I don't know yet. I'm not working toward an outcome. I'm just working." Cutler turned and looked at her with the frank assessment of a man who was accustomed to sizing things up professionally, which she found more annoying when applied to herself than to horses. "You've got experience with difficult horses?" "I have experience with horses. I've been around them all my life. A horse like that is different than—" "I know," she said evenly. "I'm not asking for input, Mr. Cutler. I appreciate you stopping by." He held up a hand, not offended exactly, more recalibrating. "I'm not trying to talk you out of anything. I'm saying that if you ever want to talk about where you're taking this, I've got experience with this particular kind of problem horse. That's all." "He's not a problem horse," she said. "He's a horse with a history." Cutler looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, not agreement exactly, but the recognition of a position he hadn't expected and was now considering. "That's a meaningful distinction," he said. "Yes, it is." He left without pressing further, which raised her opinion of him modestly. Not enough to invite him back, but enough to file him under not useless rather than avoid. She told Thora about the visit that evening. "Cutler's not wrong that he's got experience," Thora said. She was at Hadley's kitchen table with a cup of tea, her coat still on, because the kitchen was slow to warm up. "He's also not wrong that you don't have it the same way." "I know, but I've been thinking about something Faris said, about the grief being part of why it's working." Thora wrapped her hands around her mug. "Cutler doesn't have that. Whatever he's got technically, he doesn't have what you're bringing to that pen every morning, and I think Sovereign knows the difference." Hadley was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that," she said, "about what it means, because I don't want to stay like this. I don't want to stay in grief the way I've been in it. It's not sustainable. But I worry that as I come back to being more myself, more defended, I'll lose whatever it is that's gotten through to him." Thora thought about it seriously, which was one of the things Hadley valued most about her. "I don't think it works that way," she said finally. "I think what you showed him in those early weeks, that's already in him now. You already made the deposit. You're not starting from zero every morning. You're building on something real." Outside, the wind pushed against the house. Down in the pen, Sovereign stood in the cold dark, 320 days out of whatever had broken him, and 312 acres away from anyone who thought he couldn't be reached. January brought a freeze that lasted 9 days. The work slowed down because it had to. The footing in the pen was unreliable, and Hadley wasn't willing to risk either of them on icy ground. She spent the frozen days on groundwork she could do in the barn aisle, on leading and yielding, and the simple practice of being together in a confined space, without either of them being frightened of what that meant. Sovereign did not particularly enjoy the barn. He tolerated it for her, and she was aware enough by now to know that was what was happening, that he was making an active choice to stay present and contained because she was there, not because he had resolved his discomfort with enclosed spaces. That cost him something. She could see it in his body, and the fact that he paid it anyway told her more about where they were than any clean success in the round pen would have. There was a woman at the local veterinary practice named Dex, who'd been out twice in December for routine checks on the cattle, and had each time found an excuse to walk over and look at Sovereign. She was in her 30s, knowledgeable and careful, with a particular quality of attention that good vets and good horse people share, the ability to look at an animal and see not just what it is, but what it might have been and what it is working toward. In January, she came out specifically to do a full assessment of Sovereign, and what she found told the rest of the story. "Old tendon work on the left foreleg," she said, moving her hands carefully over the leg while Sovereign stood, tense but controlled, in the cross ties. Healed, but not well managed during the healing period. He was almost certainly put back to work before this was fully resolved. You can't see a lameness now, but he was in chronic pain for a significant period, maybe years. Hadley looked at the leg. So some of the behavior was pain, Dex confirmed. Not all of it. The trust issues run deeper than that. But a horse that's been hurting for a long time learns to protect himself in every interaction. The pain becomes generalized into wariness. She stood up. He's sound now. Whatever work you've been doing with him, however you've been managing his movement, it's been good for him. He's carrying himself better than he was when I first saw him in December. Hadley didn't say anything for a moment. She was thinking about the tendon, about the horse being put back to work before he was healed, about what that meant. Not the malice of it necessarily, because she didn't know whether there had been malice, but the carelessness, the priority of the work over the animal, the decision made by someone with power over the situation to not wait. She knew something about not being given enough time. She reached up and put her hand on Sovereign's neck, and he leaned into it, just slightly, just fractionally, the way he had been beginning to do in the past few weeks, leaning into pressure that offered something rather than demanding something. "We're going to keep going," she said to no one in particular. In February, a reporter from a regional publication called the Hill Country Observer contacted Hadley because someone had told someone who had told their editor about the widow and the impossible horse, and the editor had decided it sounded like a good human interest piece. Hadley declined. She declined for the same reason she had kept the round pen work private for as long as she had, because the story, while it was still being written, was not ready to be told. Because putting something fragile into public view before it had found its strength was how you damaged it. Because she had watched enough things get simplified and commented upon and turned into a narrative that served other people's needs. And she was not willing to do that to this. She told the reporter politely that there was nothing to report yet, and that if there ever was, she'd be in touch. What she did do in February was send an email to Cutler. It was 2 sentences. I've been thinking about what you said regarding working toward something. I'd be open to a conversation if you're still interested." He responded within the hour, which told her that he had been thinking about it too. They met at his operation the following week. She was prepared to be annoyed by his confidence, and was instead disarmed by the straightforwardness of his knowledge, by the fact that he listened without interrupting, by the specific and undefensive way he said, "I was wrong to come in with assumptions." "Tell me what you've actually been doing," she told him. The whole sequence, the morning watch, the first entry into the pen, the groundwork through December, what Dex had found about the tendon, where they were now. He asked good questions. Questions that told her he had thought seriously about this kind of animal and this kind of work. At the end, he said, "Where do you want to go with him? Eventually." She'd been thinking about this for 2 months. "I want to ride him," she said. "Eventually. But that's not the goal. The goal is that he chooses it. That the first time I sit on his back, it's not because I've made it impossible for him to say no. It's because he understands what I'm asking and he decides to say yes." Cutler was quiet for a moment. "That's a long road," he said. "I know. That's also the right road," he said. "For this horse, for what you've described." She nodded. "I can help," he said. "If you want it, not to take it over. I understand this is yours, but to be a resource, someone who's further down this path." She looked at him for a moment. The afternoon light was flat and white through the window, the kind of February light that makes everything look like it's waiting. "I'd appreciate that," she said. It happened on a Thursday in late March. No audience, no cameras, no Thora or Body or Faris or Dex waiting at the fence. Just Hadley and Sovereign and the morning, which was cool and clear. The sky, that particular shade of early spring blue that shows up in Texas for about 3 weeks before summer, takes over and means business. She had spent the previous week working on something specific, mounting block work. Standing beside him at the block, laying her weight across his back while he stood, sitting up, all of it slow, all of it in conversation, all of it with the gate unlocked and the option to leave if either of them needed to. He had been, in these sessions, extraordinarily present. She knew, in the way that you know certain things about an animal you have spent 6 months reading, that he understood something was changing, that the nature of the ask was different now. And she'd been watching for any sign of the old anxiety, the locked jaw, the raised head, the shifting of weight that meant retreat. Instead, she had found something she hadn't quite expected. She had found curiosity. He was interested. Carefully, watchfully, reservedly interested, but interested. His ears moved toward her rather than away. His breathing was steady. When she laid her weight across his back, he didn't brace. He breathed and shifted incrementally to find his balance and stood. On Thursday morning, she tacked him in his groundwork gear. Nothing complicated, nothing that felt like performance. She walked him out to the pen in the early light, and they did 20 minutes of work together, movement and yield, the language they had built. And then she brought him to the block. She stopped. She breathed. She asked him, in the only language she had, "Are you with me?" His ear turned toward her. She put her foot in the stirrup. She came up slowly, one hand soft on his neck. She swung her leg over and sat. And he stood. He stood absolutely still. And she sat absolutely still. And the morning held them both in that stillness for a moment that Hadley, even in the living of it, understood was one of those moments that divides time. Then he exhaled. A long, slow breath, the kind horses make when something that has been braced in them releases. She exhaled too. She sat on his back for 8 minutes. She did not ask him to move. She did not do anything except sit there and breathe and keep her seat soft and her hands quiet, and let him simply experience having her there, having this weight, having this trust given and received. After 8 minutes, she got off slowly, scratched the base of his neck. The spot she'd learned months ago was the one that made his lower lip relax and his eyes go quiet. And she stood in front of him with her forehead resting against his forehead, and she let herself cry. Not the careful underwater non-crying she had been doing since October. Real tears, releasing something. She was not crying for this moment. though this moment deserved tears. She was crying for Amos, for the Amos who had stood in this pen before her, who had loved horses with the same matter-of-fact devotion he had loved everything, who had told her once that the best thing about working with animals was that they did not allow you to be anything other than exactly what you were. They always know, he had said. They always know who you really are. She stood there with her forehead against Sovereign's, and she let the grief and the gratitude run together, because there was no clean line between them anymore. They had become the same river. Sovereign stood completely still. His breath came slow and even against her shoulder. After a while, she stepped back and looked at him. "Okay," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. "Okay." She walked him back to the barn, untacked him, turned him out, watched him move across the pasture, that long, beautiful, undiminished stride, the stride of a horse that had not been made small by what had happened to him. Then she walked to the house and called Thora. "It happened," she said when Thora picked up. A pause. Then, "Tell me," she told her. All of it. The 8 minutes, the exhale, the tears, the forehead against the forehead. She told it simply, and Thora listened simply, and when she was done, Thora was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" Thora asked. Hadley thought about it. "Like myself," she said. "Like the most myself I've felt since before he got sick. Not because Amos is any less gone, but because—" She stopped, tried again. "Because I think I've been somewhere far away for a long time, and today I came back. Amos would say it was the horse," Thora said, her voice warm and slightly rough. "He would say the horse brought you back." "Maybe," Hadley said, "or maybe we brought each other." She stayed on the phone with Thora for another hour, talking about nothing in particular, about the spring grass coming in, about a fence section down along the east pasture, about Thora's grandnephew who was apparently going through a phase, about what they might plant in the garden beds along the south side of the house. Ordinary things, the texture of an ordinary day. When she hung up, she stood at the kitchen window for a moment, looking out at the pasture where Sovereign was grazing. Then she picked up Amos's old hat, the one that had been hanging on the hook by the back door since September, the one she had not been able to move or touch or look at directly for 6 months. And she held it in her hands. She held it for a long time. Then she hung it back on the hook, not gone, just in its right place. Spring built slowly, the way it does in that part of Texas, not arriving so much as accumulating, degrees of green deepening in the pasture, mornings that stopped requiring gloves, the cedar smell of the hills shifting from cold and sharp to something warmer and more complex. Hadley rode Sovereign for the first time at a walk in early April. They went 20 minutes in the round pen. He was not perfect. He startled twice at nothing visible, testing her seat and her steadiness. And she was not perfect either, tense in moments when she should have been soft. But they got through it together, reading each other, adjusting, finding the rhythm incrementally the way you find rhythm in any new language, not fluently, but earnestly. Cutler came and watched one session. He said very little. When it was over, he said, "You've done the real work with him. The rest is just refinement." Hadley nodded. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "When I came out in December, I thought, I'll go see what the widow's doing with that horse, and if she's in over her head, I'll offer a solution." He paused. "I was looking for a problem. There wasn't one. There was just someone doing the work right." She appreciated the honesty. It had cost him something to say it. Thora organized a small dinner at her place in April. Nothing formal, just Hadley and Faris and Dex and Boddy, and a few people from town who had been quietly rooting for all of it. No one called it a celebration. They called it a dinner. But there was a particular quality to the evening, a warmth and a lightness that felt earned. Boddy gave a short toast that consisted of saying, "I said some things early on about this horse, and about this situation that weren't. That is to say, I wasn't. I was wrong." He sat back down. Everyone laughed. Faris said, when it was quieter, "You should write down what you did, the sequence, the approach, the things you learned. There are horses like Sovereign everywhere, and there are people who want to reach them and don't know how. What you found is worth passing on. Hadley thought about that. She thought about the reporter from the Hill Country Observer. She thought about the email she might write, about the story that was now perhaps ready to be told. By the time the summer heat arrived and the hill country went from green to gold, Hadley and Sovereign were riding out on the ranch. Not far at first, the east pasture, the long flat stretch along the creek. Short rides in the early morning when the air was still cool and the light came across the land at that low angle that makes everything look like it was painted rather than grown. He was not, would perhaps never be, an easy horse. He still startled at the unexpected. He still had days when some combination of smell or sound or light moved something old in him, and he went distant in a way she'd learned to recognize and wait out. He still required her full attention, her full presence, her full willingness to be exactly where she was rather than somewhere else. She did not experience this as a burden. The Hill Country Observer piece ran in June. Hadley had written the account herself, declined the reporter's offer to write it for her, and what appeared in the paper was something between an essay and a record of events, written in a voice that was plain and specific and hers. It talked about grief. It talked about what Dex had found in the old injury. It talked about presence and patience and what it means to offer safety to something that has been taught to expect harm from closeness. The response surprised her. Letters arrived at the paper, emails forwarded to her by the editor, people writing from other counties, other states, people who had horses and people who didn't, and people who were grieving, and people who were working with animals of various kinds, who had their own histories, their own defensive distances, their own old pain running beneath their behavior. She answered as many as she could, not all of them, but she tried. The one that stayed with her longest was short, handwritten on plain paper from a woman she didn't know in a town she'd never visited, about 200 miles north. It said, "I read what you wrote about going into the pen without anything to prove, about being less defended. I work with rescue dogs that were abused. I've been trying to explain to people for years why you can't come at them with a plan or an agenda. You said it better than I ever have. Thank you for putting it on paper." Hadley kept that letter in the kitchen drawer, took it out sometimes and read it. She had asked Faris late in May how you knew when you had reached a horse, what the marker was, how you recognized the line between an animal that was compliant and an animal that was genuinely present. Faris had thought about it for a while before answering. "A compliant animal gives you what you ask," she said. "A present animal gives you more than you asked because they're engaged with you, not just responding to you. They offer things, they check in, they make eye contact that isn't defensive, they stay with you after the ask is over." Hadley had sat with that. She thought about the morning, now months past, when she had sat on Sovereign's back for 8 minutes, how he had exhaled, how he had shifted his weight not to unseat her, but to balance under her. How when she'd gotten off and stood in front of him, he had pressed his forehead lightly against hers and simply stayed there. She hadn't asked him for that. He had offered it. She thought about grief, about how she had moved through the months since Amos died, the underwater quiet of the first weeks, the desperate search for something that required her full attention, the gradual rebuilding of herself, not from scratch, but from the true foundation of what she actually was, without the armor she hadn't known she was wearing. She thought about Amos saying, "They always know who you really are." She thought, maybe that's what the whole thing was. 6 months of being known. The land had been in her family for 4 generations. She was the last of her particular branch of it. The question of what came next, the cattle, the acres, the buildings, the future of the place, was a question she hadn't had the space to think about while she was doing the more urgent work of surviving. She was beginning now to have that space, and she found, to her own moderate surprise, that she was not afraid of the question. On a Tuesday evening in late June, she rode Sovereign along the western fence line to the highest point on the property, where you could see the hills rolling south toward the valley, and the sky was enormous, and the light was going orange and gold at the edges. She stopped him there, and they watched the sun go down. He was still, not the dangerous stillness of January last year, not the compressed electric readiness of a creature preparing to flee or fight. Something else. Something quieter and more settled and more present. She scratched his neck in the place that made his lip go soft. He lowered his head. Below them, the ranch stretched out in the evening light, 312 acres of what was hers, of what she had stayed for, of what had held her while she found her way back. She thought, he didn't break me open. He let me break open myself. Then she turned him toward home. And that is the story of Hadley Voss and the horse that nobody thought could be reached. I want to sit with it for just a second before we close out, because I think there's something here that goes beyond horses, beyond ranches, beyond the specific geography of a Texas hill country widow in a round pen in the cold. What Hadley understood, what took her months of showing up in the dark and the cold to understand in her body rather than just her head, is that you cannot reach a frightened thing by proving your strength. You can only reach it by laying down enough of yourself that the thing you're approaching can feel at some level below language that you are not a threat, that you're not there to take, that you're there to meet. And the strange gift she didn't ask for, the gift that came wrapped in loss and mud and frost and early mornings and grief she couldn't outrun, is that she could not have done it from behind her armor. Sometimes the thing you lose is also the thing that was keeping you from what you needed to find. That's not a comfortable truth. It doesn't make loss good or fair or okay. Amos being gone is not okay. It will never be fully okay. Hadley will tell you that herself. But life doesn't only deal in okay or not okay. It deals in what happens next, in who you become in the space after the loss, in what you go toward. She went toward the wild thing at the fence, and it came toward her. If this story moved you, if something in it landed somewhere real, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever found your way through something by going toward the thing that scared everyone else. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you in the next one.